Welcome to Hedy Lamarr, BrainCandy, ChuckChat. This is a special edition of ChuckChat BrainCandy, and it's for International Women's Month. My wife actually requested that I do something around Hedy Lamarr, and so here we are. She has an amazing story, and a story that what more could you want? It starts in Vienna. There's a war going on. It has intrigue. There's Hollywood. There's everything that you could imagine. Inventions. It's an amazing story. Her life is something that certainly is worth understanding. The what I found as I was doing the research and falling into this particular hole of understanding was there's a story that people tell, which is she invented Wi-Fi, and either she became rich or she didn't become rich or whatever along those lines in it. But the that story is not quite true. Now, it is what she did do is impressive, and actually, I personally think the true story is even more interesting than the catchy one that is told often to make things sound simple. But she didn't really invent Wi-Fi. She did co-invent something that is foundational to things that we use every day right now. So first, let's fix the myth. So she did not invent Wi-Fi. She was a movie star, big time movie star, and she wasn't a movie star who stumbled into tech. Though there is far more to her story than just that. And the Navy did not recognize the genius of her invention in the moment. It took time for that to actually happen. It was actually put aside. The myth sounds neat, but it's too simple for the to be the truth. She actually co-invented the frequency hopping anti-jam system, which is a mouthful, and probably why they they tell a shorter version when people are telling this story. But that actually tells a lot more about how complicated what it is that she was able to invent and bring into real bearing was. The closest thing to it now is Bluetooth, what we actually use today all across with a spread spectrum. But it was the patent itself didn't it was shelved at the time. It took a long time for it to actually come back, like maybe 10 years. Talk a little bit more about that later. But all of that together doesn't really lower her story. So let's go about talking about her story. She was born in Vienna, and she was born as Hedwig Eva Maria Keisler. Not the name that she would eventually be known by or become famous with, but that was her name as she was born. She was born to a family that truly loved and cared about her. Her father encouraged her to understand why things worked, how they worked, take them apart, figure it out, do more math, and actually understand things and develop a curiosity. Her mother brought in music and arts, and together it was a very enriched life, bringing all those different things together. So it wasn't just fame. She was born and built to be curious and to understand. She was a thinker and a tinker long before she was a movie star. Fame did become her public story. That was what she became known for. But she was also, I think, underestimated in many cases. She's so pretty. How could she possibly be smart? She was wicked smart, very capable. And so her early story became in the European films. She was the first to fake ecstasy on a screen. She was condemned by the Pope. Blocked by others, highly controversial. Long before she was repackaged by Hollywood, and they continued that story of glitz and glamour. She met Louis B. Mayer, and that's how she became Hedy Lamarr in that golden age of Hollywood, the studio era, where everything was big. In a lot of those cases, it kind of hid the engineer behind, but the engineer was always there. And there's lots to her story where you can see it shows up repeatedly. The curiosity was there all the way throughout. You can't tell her story without mentioning Fritz Mandl. He was a big munition seller during the World Wars, and he was, by all reports, it was a very controlling marriage. It was not a wonderful thing. It was she was watched. It was very restrictive. But they would have dinner parties, and at these dinner parties, they'd have officers, they'd have industrialists, they'd have authoritarian government people, and she would listen and learn. And she turned it into a classroom. She turned it into something where what could have been a rough experience was something that she internalized and was able to build more from, that made her mind sharper and stronger. She kept hearing about radio controlled weapons and how easy they were to jam, and what a problem that actually was. And so that would come back. She then escaped. She went to London and then eventually on to America. That was when she was in London is when she met Louis B. Mayer and the MGM recruiting machine. She made a vast amount of, I want to say it was like $500 a month, or a ridiculous amount, a very high amount for the time. But something that really celebrated her celebrity, and they helped to make her a star. They really positioned that beauty, they positioned the glamour, all of those different pieces. The new name was manufactured, but really she was still curious. She still was learning. She was continuing to dig and to want to understand. And you could really see this in her Hollywood career. And there's multiple different stories around this where she would tinker in between shoots. She would be in her dressing area. She'd be working away on different things. She studied birds. She studied fish in her trailer to try and understand better how the wings of aircraft might work. She worked and exchanged ideas with Howard Hughes, a big inventor at the time. All of this shows that invention was a habit. It was core to who she was, that intellectual curiosity, that dig into how and why. All of this really builds to show that it wasn't a fluke that she managed to do this. This was something which was almost inevitable in terms of being able to come up with a deep insight and to bring these things to bear. It was important to her. She really did care. Well, in the war gave her a problem worth solving. The missiles were taking out different boats. There was one very sad story where a boat that was transporting children was taken down by a U-boat. It was one of the most publicized and terrible stories of the war. But it became a moral imperative to get involved, not just a cool tech idea. And so she really threw herself into some of this different research because she wanted to make a difference. Well, she understood that problem, having heard about it before, and it's a really brutally simple problem when you break it down. There's a choke point here. When missiles were working, they would fire across, and you'd use a radio frequency to be able to control the missile to make sure that it was guided to its location and the destination that you actually wanted. And if it stayed on course, it would hit, you could control it. But if you knew what frequency it was, you essentially screamed into that frequency. You could jam it, you could make it break off, you could make it stop. And so there were whole boats and groups that were built on being able to figure out what those frequencies were and be able to block that frequency, and that would increase the safety of convoys of vehicles. Well, one of those things that it occurred to her is that, hey, with it being that direct, this is a choke point. We may be able to do something about that for our own missiles. It's not just sending a signal. It's how to do that when you're under attack. It's how to be able to change it. Because of course, yeah, you change the frequency periodically to be able to do that. But when you're in the middle of a war action, that's very difficult. This is actually still a problem today. This is why in some of the ChuckChat news and notes, I've talked about how Anthropic is involved and what they're trying to do with the how much can AI do in terms of a fully AI automated weapon and tracking and all of those types of things. This is still a problem being able to solve at a meaningful scale in a meaningful way that is important, especially in military actions. Well, her insight was basically stop treating it like it's fixed. I mean, it sounds obvious when you when you think about it like that. But rather than broadcasting on a fixed channel, change it on a regular basis. Hop between one and another. Change that is going with some degree of cadence and in some understood thing. And now your jammer has to predict what your next move is going to be. It has to be able to flip that. The analogy for this one is, imagine you got two friends who are using a pair of walkie-talkies. You've identified, okay, every few seconds we're going to switch forward, back, 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 forward, forward, and you can frustrate the green monster brother who's trying to scream and bother or listen in on the conversation. But it basically is that simple of, hey, if we can just synchronize that and we know ahead of time this is the pattern that we're going to go, it's harder to intercept, it's harder to predict, and it's harder to be able to block it. Far more robust, far more capable in design. And this is where George Antheil comes in. So Antheil was an avant-garde composer. He was all about timing and precision and composition, being able to say these things are going to go off at the exact same time. And he was actually a co-creator in this particular band because he did a lot of work at the time with player pianos. And if you're familiar with player pianos at all, it's basically just a sheet of paper. It's got little holes plugged in it, and those holes kick off to say, okay, here is the key of the 88 keys that we're going to hit. This is the frequency, if you were, and using a radio term. And you can make those things go off in synchronization. You can have it flip at any point in time. It wasn't just, this isn't just like a trivia item. This is really an example that of fantastic cross-disciplinary. You've got song and symphony and music and acting and actress and curiosity and technical acumen all coming together to see something that those who were involved in it on a daily basis see. I think that's where a lot of innovation comes from, is when you've got multiple different models. Everybody develops different mental models, but if you can take those mental models and apply them in different spaces, that's part of what will actually drive insights and drives new innovations and new magic. Well, proof that this really was a big idea, they got a patent. And so they patented it, and you can go up and look this up today. Still 2,292,387. It's the secret communication system. But you can see all the different technical diagrams, all the things that go along in there. So they showed and how it would actually work. They worked with a CalTech professor, Samuel McCown, to be able to actually practically implement it and say this is how it would actually work. There's a paper trail. It shows the real design. It shows the real capability that was there. And this patent is really the reason why they were able to trace it back to her again as time moved on. Well, but unfortunately, the Navy didn't really recognize it for what it was at the time. They looked at it literally and they said, well, we're going to put a player piano in every missile. Come on, I mean, we might have room for that on a ship, but we're not going to have room for that in a missile. That's nonsense. Um, they saw it was as just too cumbersome of a thing, and so they shelved it. And they thought they looked at her and they were like, "Come on, lady, you can be far more valuable to us in the war bond effort. You go tour and help us to raise funds and lift the spirits of the troops, and that's a much more valuable. You know, you'll go out there, use that fame, use that pretty face to be able to go do some of these different things." And it wasn't just a miss on the capability. It was partly institutional bias. It was partly the packaging in which the thing was delivered. So the world did catch up. It was roughly 10 years later, 12 years later, the Cuba crisis. Actually, this technique, this set of technologies emerged again as a way to be able to control missiles, as a way to be able to ensure that they were going to be able to go to their target. By that time, the patent had expired. She never got any money from the patent or from the usage of it. But the tech itself had evolved to a point where it became much more obvious that this is how you could do it. The idea of, we just use a simple shrunk piece of tape rather than a full piano didn't occur. But they had other technologies that were coming to play with silicon and other things that were able to control this and go, hey, this is something that could take off. So what really is her story? She didn't really invent Wi-Fi, no, but she did invent that early frequency hopping spread spectrum system. Again, I understand that's a mouthful, so I know why you may not want to say all of those different things, but let's say spread spectrum is probably better. The closest thing is Bluetooth right now. It's real, and that's how it actually works. It still runs on that same fundamental set of principles. That whole family tree of secure wireless communications. Even early 802.11 utilized it. They used a frequency hopping system to be able to go through there. You can't say, though, she didn't get wealthy because the patent had expired. It's not the whole Wi-Fi or wireless stack that is attributed to her. But that doesn't require that exaggeration in order to be impressive still for all the things that she did. So I want to do a specific call out. So this is a story not just because it's a quirky and interesting story about a starlet who invented something that could be used in the military machine and eventually became Wi-Fi. Well, that's a pretty cool story, but there's more to it than that, right? I think we sometimes still today we have great inventions and great ideas that because they arrive in awkward packaging or not the packaging that we're expecting, don't get treated the way that they should. And so understanding, hey, we need to look at an idea on the idea's merits and not fixate on the awkward bits of the package and how it's showing up. You take a look at the AI agenda. Initially, there was many people who wrote off the AI and LLMs as well. Who needs a chatbot, right? We only need so many chatbots, which is very true, but that's not the end goal. There's a lot more things that go on behind there. I think the other thing that you really is a important takeaway here is that a lot of times we get so focused on our singular disciplines that we don't take the time to do that cross-disciplinary collaboration. And that really is where true invention comes. When you're talking business and when you're talking tech, when you're talking different groups that have different insights, bringing that together, that's really where a lot of magic can actually happen and new and wonderful ideas actually emerge. So understanding that it's not just the immediate performance that the expertise provides, the immediate kick of things, but it's the insight and understanding where those insights are, how to be able to pull those things together. What could you do to pair different people who are outsiders to the different groups, get you a different voice? When we're talking tech and development, I've always said you got to work with your customers. If you're working with your customers, a lot of times they'll show you something, as a technologist, you're like, oh, that's the way you do that. Oh, I can fix that in 2 notes, just to cross the disciplines right there. But understanding some of those things, you can actually help to engineer some of that. The other piece that I would mention, the curiosity piece, is still key. Understanding, regardless of what it is that you're doing, how to be able to chase after some of those things. Make sure that you're looking at all of them, and don't let the appearance, whether beautiful or not, of that messenger distract you from what the message actually is. In this particular case, and for her, it wasn't just the idea. It was, they saw the inventor. They thought, hey, she should be out selling war bonds, and that's going to be more valuable to us than this actual solved problem that really would have had a major effect. So anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed this particular batch of ChuckChat, and I look forward to the next one. I look forward to always spending these things, and we'll see which internet holes and knowledge holes it is that I fall into next. And hopefully you found these valuable. Give a like, hit a subscribe, hit the bell if you want to know when I talk about some other random nonsense down the line. Thanks and have a great day.